love you. We thank you. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Well, I'm excited about today. As the buckets are being passed, I want to introduce Issac Lankford. So Issac is the Isaac and his wife Gloria, the brand new student ministers here. I've known Isaac since he was about 14, and
moving this out of the way.
all that facial hair that he has now, he did not have then.
The 3 patches you see?
See these patches?
You see these 3 patches?
They were not there when he was 14.
That's grown. I did that.
Yeah, so let's give him a warm Ocean Point welcome.
So silly. Like Tanner said, my name's Isaac. I'm part of the team here at Ocean Point. My primary role, my wife's primary role is that we work with students, and that means like 6th grade through high school. And I love that age group so much. I think you will never find an age group of people that are more passionate, honestly, more talented and more creative about just sharing the gospel with the people around them. And you look at some of these kids and you're like, they are going to change the world. And then you look at some of the other kids and you say, you guys are so brave. I love the boldness, though. I love the bravery that students have. I mean, it's the bravery that lets them pick a banana peel up off the ground and just like pop it in their mouth, and you're like, what the heck just happened? It led me to one of my favorite things. You see, we take these trips with high school and middle school students called CIY, and for high schoolers it's called Move. Middle schoolers it's called Mix, and it's this boldness mixed with the idea that there's 1,300 high school students, 600 middle school students respectively, that just creates this environment where like students aren't afraid of anybody or anything. And it's led to this question that I will always say yes to. And it's this random kid walking up to me and looks at me and just goes, do you want to see something amazing? I'm like, yes, I do, 100%. I will always say yes to that. And the next thing you know, they do a backflip in front of me and I'm like, whoa, like, this is great, you know? And other times it's like a kid, he had filled his water bottle with soda and then like shook it up and then was like, you want something really cool? And then like shoots it off like a fountain. You're like, amazing, you should probably drink more water. Like, go fill that up with water, please. Or, you know, a kid and he just sits there and he does a cat impersonation. And you're like, that's great, buddy. We love that for you. I think we're in a series right now called Signs, and it's charting the miracles of Jesus in this book that we call John. And in this, like, there's 7 miracles that we've been following. It's been an 8-week series, and this is the very last week of the series. And, you know, sometimes I think we look at miracles and we're just kind of reading them in our Bibles that kind of brush over. I mean, I do this too, where it just feels like Jesus walking up to somebody who's just kind of down in their luck, and he goes, hey, you want to see something amazing? And then, like, instead of, you know, purring like a cat, he heals them. And, like, that's what the miracles are. But I think Jesus is always so much more intentional with when, how, and why and who he does his miracles for. It's always intentional. I love what Mark talked about week 1 and what he talked about last week about the three kind of purposes of miracles. And the first one he said is that Jesus performed miracles to glorify himself so that people would believe in him. The second is that Jesus' miracles were others focused and meet a need. And the third is that Jesus is still intervening in the lives of his people in miraculous ways today. And I believe that this is very true for all miracles, all of these, but I think especially in our story today, and maybe some others, but especially prevalent in our story today, that there's a fourth purpose that is revealed. Like I said, we're going to be in John. We're going to be in chapter 11. If you've never been with us before, let me just say, get out of the way. We are so glad you're here. Like, you could have been anywhere on this Sunday. Preseason football's back, and that's great. But you chose to be here right now, and we are so glad you're here. There's this book called The Gospel of John, and the Gospel's kind of like a biography, and it's these 4 guys. There's 4 of them at the beginning of the second half of the Bible that we call the New Testament, and it just charts some of the things that Jesus said and some of the things that Jesus did. And so this is one of the stories of something that Jesus did, and we're going to be in chapter 11, and it's going to set the scene in verses 1 through 3, so I'm going to read that now. It says, now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. Right off the bat, when I read this, I kind of see that this miracle is just a little bit different. Whereas the other miracles kind of follow this structure of like, here's a guy, he's never met Jesus before, he's lost, he's broken, he's sick, he's lame, whatever it may be. Here he is, and then all of a sudden, either they go and find Jesus or Jesus finds this person, and they have this interaction, and something happens where this person is made well, and he's restored, and he's healed. But this one is different because these are people who know Jesus, who are his followers, and not just any followers, but close followers. It says that they probably believe in Jesus. They know Jesus. They love Jesus. And clearly, Jesus loves them. I mean, just listen to the words. The one whom you love is ill. Now, it's not the main point of the message, but I think it's worth noting. That sometimes we believe that when we go into the ocean and we get dunked in the water and pulled back up, that all of a sudden life is all peachy. That it's all going to work out for us in the end, and that we're like have some kind of protection. And where I really do believe that baptism and when you choose to follow Jesus makes you whole and gives you a purpose that you've never had before, I don't think it protects you from the corruption of this world. And this is what this story reveals, is that it's not because they did anything wrong. It's not because bad things don't happen to you because you did something wrong. Bad things don't happen because God hates you. But simply, it's the result of a world that has been corrupted by sin. These were followers of Jesus who are experiencing this tragedy. In verse 4, we see Jesus' response to this. But when Jesus heard this, he said, the illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. And I hear this kind of like a charge. Jesus is like if I'm reading this story and I'm taking it verse by verse, I'm like, Jesus is about to go raise that man. Like he's about to go heal that man. Like, let's go. He's like, this is not going to lead to death. This is for the glory of God. Like that's the tone that I read this passage in. But then he does something that kind of seems anti what he just said. He said, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Good, he's going to go heal Lazarus. No, in verse 6, so when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place that he was. That means one of two things. It makes it come across like either one, Jesus doesn't care, or two, that it's not as bad as it seems to be. I don't think either of those are true, but that's how it comes across. And then in verse 7, it says, after this, he said to the disciples, let us go to Judea again. And so now they're about to go to Judea and heal Lazarus. Here's the thing. I don't know if you've ever had those moments where somebody tries to talk in code to you. I have this awful personality combination where I'm really, really good at cultivating awkward situations and really, really poor at picking up social cues, especially if they're coming from my wife. And she hates awkward situations, so it typically goes like this, where I start to say something, and typically it's a statement that's a little outlandish or maybe slightly inappropriate, and there's this look. You guys know the look. I don't know the look. This interaction where she tries to steer the conversation, try to brush it off, and then I almost double down on it, and then it just leads to this moment where he speaks plainly of Glory's just all right, let's just change the subject, let's just move on. And I'm like, here I was thinking I was hilarious. So this is kind of the conversation that progresses in the story with Jesus and his disciples as he speaks in this code, speaks kind of cryptically. He's he talks about this guy who walks in the light, so he's not going to stumble. And it's but the man who walks in darkness is going to stumble. And saying these things, the disciples are like, what? And then he responds, Lazarus has fallen asleep, and we're going to go wake him up. And they go, Jesus, the city that you're going to, these people tried to kill you earlier, and you're going to go wake a guy up? If he's asleep, I don't know if you know how sleep works, Jesus, but if somebody falls asleep, they're probably going to wake back up. And he's like, At that point, he just kind of ditches it. He says plainly. It says in verse 14, it's one of my favorites because I just hear a little bit of like sassiness from Jesus here. It says, and Jesus said plainly, Lazarus has died. He's dead. And then it continues in verse 15, and it says, and for your sake, I am glad that I was not there, so that you may believe, but let us go to him. I find it interesting. The reason Jesus waited so long, now at this point, he's waited 4 days, because it takes 2 days to get from where Jesus is at, which is where he healed that blind guy, to get to where Lazarus is. And so he waited 2 days, and it's going to take 2 days to get there. And honestly, it takes 2 days for a message to get to Jesus. So Lazarus, if you can picture it, with Mary and Martha, the sisters of Lazarus, Lazarus starts to get sick. And then it gets worse. And then it gets worse. And they start consulting doctors, and they're like, there's nothing we can do. And then it gets to the point where it's like, it's bad. It's got to be really bad if you send a messenger that urgent. And they send for Jesus, and Jesus doesn't respond. It doesn't say that he sends a messenger back and says, all right, I'll be there in a couple of days. It's 6 days of radio silence for Mary and Martha, and I read that, and I go, how is that for the betterment of their faith? But we're about to find out. If I were Mary and Martha, I would be pretty discouraged. I'd be bitter, maybe angry, kind of sad, distraught. I don't know where they are emotionally at this point, but I can imagine not great. And the text actually tells us that they actually are processing it differently, because when Jesus arrives 2 days later, Lazarus has now died on day 2, and it's been 4 days since Lazarus has been dead. And so Jesus shows up, and Martha, who is one of the sisters, goes out and meets him immediately. And then Mary stays behind. They both know that Jesus is there, but only one of them goes. And that shows that they're processing it differently. And when Martha found Jesus, we see her say this in verse 21. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And I think when we read that, we can read a little bit of bitterness into this, but I don't think that's the tone that Martha has here, because it continues in verse 22. It says, but even now, I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. I think this is an act of faith. I think Martha believes that Lazarus may not be gone. I mean, it even shows us later, because Jesus then goes, your brother Lazarus, he's going to rise again. And Martha kind of shrugs it off. She's like, I know, you've been talking about it. In the last days, everybody's going to rise up, and we're all going to be together again, and that's going to be great. And it was almost like this moment, it's like, okay, Jesus, you're trying to comfort me, but my brother's gone. And he's like, no, that's not what I mean. And he says in verse 25, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet he shall live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. And then he asks Martha the most important question. Do you believe this? Martha, do you believe that I control the powers of life and death? Do you believe that there is deeper life and purpose in me than anywhere else? Do you believe that if you believe in me, that death holds no power over you? Do you believe this? In verse 27, she kind of completes her declaration of faith in the Lord, and she says, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. I don't know about you. A time ago, I used to think that, Christ was Jesus' last name. I mean, it makes sense, right? Jesus Christ. And, it's like, he'd call and roll in, like, synagogue or something, and it's like, Isaac Lankford, here, Jesus Christ, here, like, that's how it would work. Or he'd introduce himself to, like, one of his parents' friends, like, oh, I'm Jesus, I'm the son of Mary and Joseph Christ. If you thought that was the case going in, it's okay, we were in the same boat. Like, I promise you were in the same boat, but I don't think that's what's happening here. You see, when the Bible, all right, here we go. This is the nerd zone. I'm just going to stay here for a little bit. You see, the Bible was not originally written in English. In the second half of the Bible that we call the New Testament, it was actually written in a language that was Greek, an ancient form of Greek. And in the Old Testament, the first half of the book was actually written in a language that was an ancient form of Hebrew. And in this language, Greek, that this book was written in the second half, these words were used by the Romans. It was the common word. I don't know if you know. Rome had taken over the Jewish people. And basically what had happened was, this word Christos, the word for Christ, means the anointed one. And they were anointed for two things. One, to rule over the people of the world, of the known world. And second was to bring salvation of the world through conquering lands. That's what Caesar did, okay? And the second thing that he says is the Son of God. Everybody believed that Caesar was straight from God. He was a son of the gods. And when you pledged your allegiance to Rome and you pledged your allegiance to Caesar, this is something that you would say, that I believe that Caesar's the anointed, and he's a son of the gods. And so I think, yes, that Martha here is making a declaration of who Jesus is, that Jesus is the anointed one. He is the one who is going to rule over the world, and he's the one who will save the world from the corruption of sin. And that she believes that he's the Son of God, who is sent from God to go to the cross and to resurrect. Yes, I believe that is a declaration of faith, but it is also, don't miss it, a pledge, kind of pledging her allegiance to no other power except Christ. Nothing else holds me. Nothing else I cling to except Christ. And that is her declaration of faith. And then Martha's interaction just ends there. I just assume that then what happens is we read in the next couple verses, Jesus sends Martha to go get Mary, and Martha says to Mary, hey, Jesus is looking for you. And I don't know what it was, but something within her stirred so greatly. She felt such a rush of emotion. And we know this because everybody who was around her thought she was about to run to the tomb just to go cry and go weep over her dead brother. And instead, she was running to Jesus. And so this overflow of emotion has brought her to a place where she saw Jesus in the same place that Martha did. And instead of Martha, who was probably looking at Jesus and saying these things, Mary couldn't even bring herself to look at him. It says that she fell at his feet in a posture of utter despair, of utter mourning, of utter defeat and sadness, unable to look at the face of Christ. I don't know how you picture God. Once again, there was a time when I thought that there was any expression of doubt in my being. That if there's ever a time when I didn't believe that God could do the things that he says he could do, that I always thought God kind of crossed his arms, shook his head, and was just like, really? Again? This is how it is? And then he'd be angry or frustrated because of my lack of faith, but that's not what Jesus does here. He looks at the despair of Mary and the weeping of the people around him and the way that Lazarus was loved, and this was his reaction in verse 33 and ongoing. It says, when Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And he said, where have you laid him? And they said, Lord, come and see. 35, it just says, Jesus wept. So the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind may also have kept this man from dying? I don't know who needs to hear this today, but when you experience things in your life that bring you to a doubt of who God is, maybe for you it is a loss of a loved one. Maybe for you, family members or friends are sick, or you lost your job, or money's tight, or that friend or that family member just kind of cut you out. Whatever it may be has brought you a place of doubt of who God is. Maybe you picture his reaction to your doubt as disappointment, anger, or frustration, looking down on you because you failed again. But I'm here to tell you that Jesus tells us a different story. That Jesus is compassionate, that he is forgiving, that he is empathetic, and that his heart breaks for the things of this world that break yours. See, I don't think Jesus was crying because Lazarus was dead. To me, that doesn't make sense. if he knows that Lazarus is going to rise from the dead, and that eventually at the end of the story, spoiler alert, he's going to call Lazarus out from the dead, and that Lazarus is going to be alive again, then I don't think he's weeping because he's dead. I think he's weeping because God's heart breaks for the things that break yours. But I think it's weeping for a second reason, and I think it's because he knows that this is not the way that the world was supposed to be. This wasn't in the design plans of God's creation, and that because of our sin, we are separated from God, and now we experience the corruption of this world, and that includes death. And Jesus knows that this isn't the way that things are supposed to be, and he is weeping with all creation because of it. This is not the way that things are supposed to be. At least this is what I kept telling myself. You see, growing up, I would say I had a good life, 2 parents who loved me. I had siblings who I got along with and loved. I had a lot of friends. Money was fine. Most people on the outside looking in would say, man, got it made. This began to shift around 2010. My parents sat us down for a family meeting and told us that my grandmother, my dad's mom, had something that I'd never heard of before. Called it cancer. And I could pick up on the fact that it was serious. But what I not picked up on was how serious it would be and be made known in our family. The next year, 2011, my parents sit us down for another family meeting. Turns out cancer is kind of spreading through my dad's mom, and it's made its way into my mom's mom as well. At this time, that was the time that I really began to take this whole Jesus thing seriously. And so I did exactly what these sisters did at the beginning of the story. I thought it was hopeless, and I thought there was only one person who I could send for that would actually come and bring healing to my family. And so I messaged for him. I prayed, and then I prayed, and then I prayed, and then I was met with what felt like silence. 2012, my dad's mom ended up passing away, and then in 2013, my mom's mom did as well. And I just remember feeling like Martha. Yeah, Lord, I still believe, but I'm just kind of clinging onto a thread here. Some time would pass, and my faith would strengthen a little bit, and I don't know if it would prepare us for what happened next. In 2016, my parents sat us down for another family meeting, and they still wonder why we get anxious when they say, hey, let's have a family meeting. But they sit us down for a family meeting, and they let us know that my mom and my mom's dad were both diagnosed with cancer on the same day. In 2017, my grandfather, my mom's dad, ends up passing away, and my other grandfather ends up getting cancer. In 2018, he passes away, and now we find ourselves in 2022 with my mom, who is as of about a month in remission. And this is after 3 bouts of cancer and a stem cell transplant, and I can't look over here. She's sitting right over here. So last service I cried, so we can't look over here. Throughout the years, there have been times where these tragedies have brought me to a place of despair, and I felt like Mary. Felt like I had fallen at the feet of Jesus and said, Lord, if you would only have been here. This is not the way that the world is supposed to be. This is not how it was supposed to end. But for every time that I felt despair, Jesus responded to my despair with an overwhelming demonstration of his love. He always showed me that this was not the way that the world was supposed to be. And every time I found myself in that place of despair, he always agreed with me that this is not the way it was supposed to be, and then showed me the way that the world the way that God had intended to create it. And that's exactly what he does in this story. After weeping with Mary, in full agreement at the broken status of the world, he reveals his plan of redemption for it. He goes to the tomb. He tells the people, roll away the stone. And then he says, Lazarus, come out. And out walks Lazarus, stench and all, face cloth still over his head from the burial garments, hands tied, feet tied, kind of hobbling out of the tomb. And he accomplishes exactly what he meant in verses 25 through 26 when he says, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet he shall live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? And he does exactly the goal that he sets out in verse 4, which says, but when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified. You see, I think the purpose of miracles is, yes, to glorify God and the Son of God through it. I think the purpose of parables is, yes, to meet a need, both physical and spiritual. And I think the purpose of miracles is, yes, to show that miracles still happen today. And the fourth thing I would add on to this is that the purpose of miracles, and the purpose of this miracle, is that through Lazarus' resurrection, Jesus gives us a glimpse of what he is eventually going to do for the whole world. To put it another way, I would say because Jesus demonstrates his love for us through the resurrection of his people. See, after the story, we go into the final couple weeks of Jesus's life. Chapters 12 through 21 only chart like 2 weeks of his life. But it's the time that he is going to be put on trial falsely. He is going to be falsely accused. He is going to be beaten, mocked, jeered, tortured, flogged. He's going to be wrongly taken to a cross to pay for something that he didn't deserve. He's going to hang on that cross until he dies. He is then going to be buried into a tomb for 3 days. And then after those 3 days, he is going to rise from the dead, just like he did for Lazarus. See, Lazarus was just a small glimpse of what Jesus did for the whole world. Sorry. You see, here's the thing. We too have an illness, and the illness is called sin, but our illness will not lead to death. It will lead only to the glory of the Son of God. And the question is, do you believe this? Listen, I don't know where you are. Some of you are in this room right now are in a place where Mary and Martha were at the beginning of the story. And life starts to feel like it's falling apart, and you kind of feel like your last-ditch effort is to send for Jesus. Like, I don't know about this Jesus guy, but I'm here. And maybe that's brought you to right here, right now. And if that's the case, we are so glad you're here. You could have been anywhere, but you chose to be here. Maybe you're in a place where it's kind of already fallen apart, and you feel like Martha, and you're just kind of clinging on to the hope. Just a little bit, but barely. Or maybe you're like Mary in a place of total and utter despair. You need to know that Jesus is with you in the moment, and he is going to show you how the world was intended to be. No matter where you are today, I have one proposition expressed 3 ways, but first I got a story. It was sometime after 2018, and I was sitting with a mentor, and I was in his office, and I was really processing a lot of the stuff that had happened, and with my family and with our sickness, and my mom was still in the throes of her first bout with cancer, and I looked at him and I said, man, I just want to see a miracle. And he looked at me and he goes, what do you mean by that? And it was like, I want to see, my mom's sick and I want to see her healed. Or, there's like people who are hungry or something, and I want to see money, or not money, but food appear on their doorstep or something. And he's like, Okay, I hear you. But I think you need to ask yourself the question, what if the greatest miracle that you see in your lifetime is somebody being raised from death to life? I don't know what it was about him saying that, but at that moment it clicked for me. My perspective changed. I said earlier in my story that every time that I was in a place of despair, God met me through an overwhelming demonstration of his love. And that's because when that conversation opened my eyes to see that that though it felt like my life was crumbling around me, that God was right there with me, weeping with me in the way that this was not the way the world was supposed to be, but then showing me the world he intended. And he did this through miracles of resurrection. I could sit here for hours, and you wouldn't want to do that because I'm kind of annoying. And talk about stories of guys like Nick P. and Nick S. You have to distinguish them. They're both here right now. I could tell you stories of people like Katie or a girl that I met at a camp named Mackenzie or a guy named Oscar or Karsten. And then there are 3 Logans that I know that are miracles of resurrection. And even now I could tell you stories as I've been wrestling with doubt, even in the last couple of months, of students that are here in this church that tonight when we go to Wipeout are going to be baptized and are going to demonstrate their move from death, that they were once walking one way, but no, I want to walk somewhere else, and they're about to declare that. And I could tell you stories of Mia and Caitlin and Abigail and Caroline and Noah or Caden. Each at one point a different person who was lost, but now a completely different person because of the resurrection of Jesus. And for each of them, I remember a time where my faith was strengthened through their testimony because Jesus demonstrates his love for us through the resurrection of his people. And so I have 3 things I just want you to consider. Consider sharing your story. It's hard knowing if your story really has an impact. I used to think that I didn't have a story. And I would pray for one, and that was maybe a mistake. You can laugh, it's okay. You can laugh at that one. Share your story with someone. You never know who needs to hear it. Or maybe you're in a place where you just need to hear a story of resurrection, and so you need to go ask somebody for their story. You'd be surprised how that will strengthen the faith of everybody around you. Second thing, and it's kind of 2 in 1, we have this event that we're calling Wipeout. I mentioned it earlier. Basically, we are gathering at Second Beach, okay? And I think it's path 3, stand 4. Wanted to get it right, you know? So it's this event where we take people and they have made the commitment of being baptized, and we have like 10 or 12 baptisms. Like, I'm not even joking, that we're going to take people and we are going to dunk them in the water to represent that they are dying to their old selves with Christ on the cross. And then when they're pulled back up, that they are resurrected with him in new life and that their life is changed forever. And let me tell you that every single person who is going out into that water is a miracle. And so my encouragement is, if you are considering that decision, maybe this is your first time here and you're like, I've never heard of this before, but I'm interested. Or maybe you've been here a while and you just keep pushing it off. My encouragement is, come join us and dunk you in the water. The other thing I want you to consider is just coming and attending. Like I said, I don't know where really any of you are at. I know where I'm at, hopefully. But I want you to just consider coming to witness and celebrate these baptisms. Like I said, every single one of these people is a living and breathing miracle that is going to be performed right in front of your eyes. And so maybe you're in a place where that is something you need to see. And so let me ask you, do you want to see something amazing? It's a question I'll never say no to. So my encouragement is, if you want to see something amazing, to come join us tonight and witness these miracles happen firsthand. Father, I thank you so much for